because of the ongoing genocide. Out of the 6 million population of the Tigray region, 5.2 of them are facing a man-made famine. This is all because the dictator in Ethiopia wants to stay in power illegally and unconstitutionally. We, as a global citizens, have the power to come together and stop the suffering of the innocent people. We're here calling on the U.S. government to impose targeted economic sanctions on Ethiopia and Eritrea, to impose arms embargo so that these genocidal forces do not continue to buy armaments and kill innocent people. You can join our social media movement by using the hashtag Tigray Genocide on Twitter. You can also join our grassroots movement and lobbying efforts by talking to your senators and Congress people and pushing them to impose sanctions on Ethiopia and Eritrea. Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Isaias to the ICC!
Isaias to the ICC!
Isaias to the ICC!
Isaias to the ICC!
Drop food, not bombs!
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 If I can't hear you, they can't hear you. Who are we? Who are we? Who are we? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want it? What do we want it? What do we want it? Who are we? Who are we? Who are we? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want it? 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 Stop the Tigray Genocide! 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 This is a peaceful protest against the ongoing state-sponsored genocide in Tigray, Ethiopia. For the past 9 months, the government of Ethiopia colluded with the government of Eritrea to bomb, rape, murder, massacre, and annihilate the Tagaru people. Of the 6 million innocent civilians in Tigray, over 90% of the population is in need of emergency humanitarian aid. There's no food, no water, no gas, no electricity. The people are being annihilated in complete darkness. We've been fighting for 9 months on the street, but we can't do it alone. We need our allies and our outside communities to speak up on our behalf. We united together in the 80s when our people were starving, and we need to do it together again. The people have no food, no water, no aid. They've completely blocked access to the region, and the government of Ethiopia and Eritrea have weaponized hunger and rape as a means to further their own political agenda. We need to unite together and use our voice to bring an end to this. We've done it for the last 9 months, and we can't let up. Who are we? Who are we? Who are we? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want it?
I want justice!
I want justice!
I want peace!
I want peace!
We demand justice!
We demand justice!
We demand peace!
We demand peace!
Weaponized hunger is a crime!
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 Stop the war on Tigray!
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 Ethiopia's guilty of genocide!
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 Ethiopia is guilty of genocide. 680 days of genocide. Somebody go ahead and share this right now. I know that many of you are wondering why I continually talk about this genocide taking place in Tigray. And it's because most world leaders are not. And those who are, it seems as though what they are saying is falling on deaf ears. 680 days of genocide. Somebody go ahead and share this. Can Can you imagine in 2022, we are talking about genocide in any way, shape, or form? Can you imagine in 2022, we are talking about genocide? And I'm sure somebody's going to ask the question, how could this even be possible? How could this even be possible? 680 days of systemic rape, 680 days of food being used as a weapon, leading to what? Starvation, no access to banking, no access to communication, a entire region totally blocked out and blocked off from the world. No access to medicine, hospitals. And it's 680 days. Who's going to, in the future, look back and say, wow, there was a genocide that took place in Tigray? And I remember Brother Jeff was talking about it, but I didn't really understand the gravity of it until I saw the movie or the documentary some many years later. This is a shame. As a matter of fact, what I want to do is I want to provide a framework, a little structure, and I'm just going to think out loud, because you should be like me saying, how could this even happen? Well, I'm going to tell you how and why it's happening, and I'm going to tell you that there's a tradition of genocide in Ethiopia. There is a tradition of genocide in Ethiopia. I'm going to say that once again, because someone is going to perhaps say, I don't know what I'm talking about. However, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, the next genocider up, has allowed me to see a little broader, a little further, and a little wider, because prior to that, I was just under the common myth of Ethiopia had never been colonized. But look what Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has done. You heard the opening remarks where an entire people are now saying, who are we? Tagaru. That is thanks to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Who are we? Tagaru. Those individuals would have been saying, who are we, Ethiopian, prior to 680 days of genocide. I'm going to break some things down, so let's go ahead and share this. I'm going to, first, let me just go back. I want to go back because it's almost 2 years. Let me go back to some of the things that we were reading and talking about. Let's go back to April of 2021. Let's go back to April of 2021. Do you remember U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield? Anybody remember that name? Anybody remember the black woman by the name of Linda Thomas Greenfield, and she's an ambassador to the United States of America? Does that name ring a bell? Well, back in April, she had made a statement and said that, the United States is concerned about grave deterioration of humanitarian rights in Tigray. And they have credible reports that Eritrean forces are inside of Tigray. Now, this is April of 2021. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield at that point said she was horrified. And she was talking in the royal we, i.e. the United States representative. We are horrified by the reports of rape and other unspeakably cruel sexual violence that continue to surface. I just wanted to remind you of what someone from a high level in the United States of America said back in April of 2021. See, because now there's this silence and folks are acting as if, well, maybe we don't know about this. Can we get some more information? Well, I've got all kinds of joint letters and resolutions. Does anybody remember this guy by the name of Secretary of State Tony Blinken? Secretary of State Tony Blinken. Anybody remember that name? Well, back in March of 2021, Tony Blinken was using the term ethnic cleansing. Ethnic cleansing to describe human rights abuses which were happening in Tigray. And Blinken said it was unacceptable. This was back in April. Just wanted to remind some individuals that might be tuning in and thinking this is new. This is not new. It's almost 2 years of genocide. I could pull out all of the different reports where the human rights organizations and the humanitarian organizations were talking about millions being displaced and murdered, etc. Well, let's move it up to the current right now. Let me give you some of these numbers. 500,000 Tigrayans have been murdered. See, we're at 500,000. 91% of the population is in need of food. 120,000 girls and women have been raped. 80% of the healthcare facilities are destroyed. 50% of the population is expected to be dead by now. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Not to mention Turkey and the UAE are piling on by providing drones. In fact, we understand that there was a drone attack today impacting civilians in Mekelle. We already told you last week that preschool, kindergarten children were murdered and hospitals destroyed. I just gave you the update. 80% of the healthcare facilities have been destroyed in 2022. In 2022, the World Health Organization General Director, Dr. Tedros, says that the crisis in Tigray is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. In the world right now. I wonder if any of this has led you to ask any questions or maybe share or maybe just give a moment of pause to say, how could this be? Well, Brother Jeff's going to give you a little bit of insight in terms of how this could be. And the first thing I got to tell you is everything you think about Ethiopia that you've learned from the myth makers and insiders and agents of, much of it is obscure and leads you to nowhere. And leads you to nowhere. Most of us, prior to Abiy Ahmed's genocidal policy, had no idea of what Ethiopia actually is in general. We don't know. We didn't know, but now we have a little bit more to ponder. Where should I start? What is Ethiopia? And some of this is going to be new to some of you who are just tuning in, and some of it's going to be a refresher to others like me, going back to, let me give you their names again. Secretary of State of the United States of America, Tony Blinken, and Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. She's the black woman. Like, she's the black woman, and I guess her job is so big that we haven't heard from her. We don't know when we're talking about black women being systemically raped. I mean, maybe we as black people believe that those are black people somewhere else, so it has nothing to do with us. Like, see, we get so close to power and we get so, hotty-toddy that we forget about other people. We're like, oh, that's over there. Well, where do you think you're from? Over there. Stop the Genocide in Tigray. It's 680 days of genocide, and I'm just getting started. I'm going to give you the history of genocide inside of Ethiopia. And I'm using the term Ethiopia specifically because I actually mean Ethiopia, because Ethiopia is more of a 20th century creation, and it starts to come into prominence around the time of Naftanya Menelik II. Ethiopia begins its advent around the time of Naftanya Menelik II. I'm going to show you a picture. I'm going to ask you to make some comparisons. Somebody go ahead and share this. I'm going to show you Naftanya Menelik II. And I want you to pay close attention to this heralded leader by some. And those some really consider themselves Ethiopian. There's a some that really considers themselves Ethiopian, and I'm going to show you a picture of their hero right now. His name is Naftanya Menelik II, and I want you to see who he's next to. Just showing you a, if you don't mind, we can call him the father of Ethiopia. We can call him the father of Ethiopia. Just follow along, because you're going to start to see individuals that will say that Brother Jeff is making some stuff up. That's Naftanya Menelik II. I imagine many don't know who he's next to, but they obviously shop at the same haberdashery, because the founder of Ethiopia seems to really love that same style that Alfred Lord Tennyson sports. And some of you are going to say, who's Alfred Lord Tennyson? Just wanted to give you a kind of perspective right now in terms of partnerships, allies, etc., because many of you might not know this. Many of you have heard about the European Holocaust. Let's all say it together. Many of you understand the European Holocaust, where upwards to 6 million Jews were going through what the Tigrayan or the Tagaru are going through right now. I want to ask you this question. Did you know that the individual I just showed you a picture of, Naftanya Menelik II, murdered up to 6 million Oromo? Or you didn't know that? Like, I just showed you an individual who murdered up to 6 million. His policies policies led to the extermination, the murder, the decimation to 5 to 6 million black people. That black man right there, take a look at him, because maybe you haven't seen or heard this information before, and I'm sharing it with you today. That black man, who obviously has a great affinity for the style of the poet next to him, murdered 5 to 6 million black people. Murdered 5 to 6 million black people, aka the Oromo. I don't understand if individuals are catching the point, but we're going to continue it. We're going to continue it because there's a history of genocide in Ethiopia. So as we start to think about Ethiopia, what I want you to do is think about it this way. I want you to think about this regionally. I want you to think about the North, and I want you to think about the South. Just whatever you know about Ethiopia, this current map that you have, and these boundaries were drawn up by colonial powers. These boundaries were drawn up by colonial powers with the partnership of individuals like Naftanya Menelik II. I want you to think about what you know as Ethiopia today, and I want you to split it in half. And at one part, I want you to say north, and then at one part, I want you to say south. Okay, you got that? We've got this the north, and we've got this the south. This might be the price of the ticket for you right now. The north was never Ethiopia. The northern part of what you call Ethiopia was never Ethiopia. What you know of Ethiopia began in the south. Stop the genocide in Tigray. See, this is if you were to tune out right now and just take what I've shared with you, you would be more informed than most of the people on the planet right now as it relates to Ethiopia. Because I just told you there is one individual that murdered 5 to 6 million black people, they're Oromo. And then I also told you what you know of as Ethiopia did not begin in the north, but began in the south. And so now we're going to get to the point of why there's a genocide in Tigray. Why there's a genocide in Tigray. Somebody go ahead and share this right now. And I'm just passing by for just a moment. Just passing by for just a moment. I really would like to share with you also the fact that there are Ethiopians, but we're going to break this down a little further, that you believe had something to do with the building of northern Ethiopia. And further on, you're going to believe that they were attached to the building of pyramids and all of this stuff that we call Nubia. The individuals I'm talking about have nothing to do with Nubia. The only thing they did was stole the Nubian story and have you believing that they are the keepers of the story that has absolutely nothing to do with them. And the same thing I'm telling you right now, those individuals from the South had nothing to do with what was taking place in the north of what you call Ethiopia. Actually, much of what you know about Ethiopia as it relates to the north is in Tigray. See, the same individuals that are stealing the story here run around as if this is their story up there. But the Ethiopia, that began with the murder of up to 5 to 6 million black people by a black man by the name of Naftanya Menelik II, was in partnership with European powers. It coincided with the scramble for Africa. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Again, perhaps up to 500,000 civilians have been killed. Under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who is directly connected to the genocidal history that we're talking about right now. Shall we go forward or should I just stop right now? Like, did I give you enough? Right now? Let me give you an idea of the thinking of this genocidal philosophy that I'm wondering if Ethiopia is going to be able to shed, and I don't believe it has the ability or the desire. So we're gonna break this, what you call Ethiopia, down for right now, because I'm taking you north, and we're gonna call the north part Tigray. I'm talking about up by the water. I'm talking about Aksum, the Aksumite kingdom, the steles, the Ark of the Covenant, the Battle of Adwa, Queen Sheba's palace. All of this is in Tigray. Now I'm going to give you the southern story, and the southern story is in the south, and we're going to call that Shewa, Shewa. You can call it Showa, Shua. I don't know how to pronounce it. Showa, Shua. But we're going to say Tigray north, Showa south. There's your battle lines right there. And it goes well before the so-called attack of the Northern Command. That's propaganda also. The battle we're talking about goes all the way back. As a matter of fact, you can follow the language. You can go all the way back to Giz, which you will find coming out of Giz is Tigrinya. And guess what's coming out of Tigrinya? Amharic. Stop the genocide in Tigray. When we get south to Shua or Showa, guess what? The people in the south did not speak any Semitic language, and they didn't speak the language or the Lasan Nagus, the language of Naftanya Menelik II and his predecessors. So can you imagine a people amongst another people who are in a rulership position and they don't even speak the language of the area that they're in? Stop the genocide in Tigray. I'm just giving you a little history lesson, maybe some things that you can think about. Can you imagine a people amongst another people and they don't even speak the language of the people that they are amongst? That's called colonization. So in other words, Ethiopia is a colonizer. That's why they hadn't been colonized, because they've been partnering with colonizers, and Ethiopia is a colonizer. And I'm talking about Shua. And I'm talking about 5 to 6 million black folks that were murdered by someone who didn't even speak the language of the ones he was murdering. Stop the genocide in Tigray. I hope this is helping just a little bit, because the tradition continues. The tradition continues, and if you understand that a genocide that's taking place now is the tradition of these colonizers, and I'm talking about the elite, why would you think 5 to 6 million individuals, perhaps collectively known as Oromo, would be murdered? Well, let's build this for just a second. All right. We're talking about the South, and we're talking about Shua, and the language of Shua is Amharic. And let's just break this down a little bit. Let's just break this down a little in chunks. If we go south and we go into Shua and we have a king, or what's known as the king of Shua. He wasn't the king of anything, the king of Shua, and it still said the king of Shua and all of the Gala. You'd have to know what this derogatory term called Gala means. In other words, the 5 to 6 million that were being murdered were different, and they were known as Gala. But that term Gala comes from the language that's being spoken by the Shuan royalty or leadership or hierarchy, and it's Amharic. That's the language. So in other words, the 5 to 6 million that are being murdered because A, they don't speak the language, 2, B, they're different, and the difference is being described in the term Gala. See, I'm just giving you a history of what's happened in the past because it's happening in the future right now. And then I'm going to tell you how it's hidden. I'm going to tell you how the world hid all of this. Remind me to tell you how the world, in partnership with this colonization, I'm talking about the Western powers, I'm going to tell you how they hid all of this. Because you can't hide genocide, but I just told you 5 to 6 million black folks were murdered between the 1850 up to 1914. This is relative new history, and many of you never learned that up to 5 to 6 million black folks were murdered by a black person, and that's interesting. The reason you don't know is because it's been hidden by the partners of colonizers. It's a partnership. I got more. I'm just getting started. So obviously the 5 to 6 million who were not being, the 5 to 6 million that are being murdered, they're obviously not Amharic. They're obviously occupied because the occupiers are inside of a land where they don't even speak the language of the masses that are surrounding them. And guess what else they are? They're Christian. Not any particular kind of Christian, a very specific type of Christian. This is just a historical fact. There was a time not too long ago where there was this Christian notion of expansion. And if you weren't Christian, you were savage, uncivilized, and by some powers ripe to be enslaved. I could go on and on and on and on and on. So inside of the South, you've got a power that is Shuan, Amharic, and Christian, Orthodox Christian from a particular vantage point. But that, I don't want to get into a religious conversation right now because a lot of folks are not ready to have that, and I respect everybody's religion, and some people have already gotten all bent up because somebody said Christian. It's not about the faith. It's what power does in the name of faith. It's not about your faith. It's what power does in the name of faith to subject other people. So obviously these Oromo, I'm just saying this collective Oromo, where 5 to 6 million of them were murdered. They weren't Amharic and they weren't Christian, so they were slaughtered. But the underlying motive was to take their land, because in the south of what you call Ethiopia now, there's large minerals, gold, and all sorts of wealth that this fine gentleman, who some of you clap and admire, was slaughtering them. But it's not uncommon. I hope some of this is helpful. Should we go further? Should we go further? Because Naftanya Menelik II had a cousin. His cousin's name is Makanin. Now, I don't know if any of you've heard this term or this name, Makanin. Let me just see if anybody can tell me about, like, this is the black man with the white man's hat on. The black man with the white man's hat on, who's slaughtering black people, has a cousin by the name of Makanin. And here's another reason why it's hard for you to track this history, because in this particular tradition, you can't track someone by their last name. See, it's easy to hide stuff. You can't track people by their last name because they don't have a surname. They have their father's name. Their father's first name becomes their last name. So you only have one father. So you can't track this thing down. The black man with the white man's hat who killed 5 to 6 million Oromo in the South in their own land, who did not speak the language of the individuals that he was colonizing, had a cousin by the name of Makanin. Well, let's just go back to the fact that you carry your father's first name. Anybody know the name of the man on the right? Well, wait, there's some interesting apparel. There's some interesting apparel, and there's some correlations that I want to show you. Stop the genocide in Tigray. The man on the right, his name is Ross. Come on, we can all say it together. His name is Naftanya Ross Tafari Makanin. In other words, the cousin of the man who's the cousin of the black man in the white man's hat who murdered 5 to 6 million Oromo or black people. His cousin is the man on the right's daddy. His cousin is the man on the right's daddy. Stop the genocide in Tigray. So in other words, if there was someone who was instrumental in murdering 5 to 6 million individuals, it was that man on the right's daddy, and that man on the right's name is Naftanya Ross Tafari Makanin. Makanin is the name of the father of the black man in the white man's hat who murdered 5 to 6 million individuals. So what I'm telling you is that the tradition of genocide continued via the black man who's dressed like the white man on the left. The black man who's dressed like the white man on the left continued the culture of genocide inside of what we call Ethiopia, which began in Showa in the south and not the north. I guess you guys are wondering who was the white man standing next to the black man with all of those ribbons and like awards and all of those different things. Like, I'll give everybody 5 points if you could tell me who that white man is next to the black man while they have similar apparel, just like the black man who had the white man's hat on. Okay, well, I'm gonna just go ahead and give you the answer then, since you want the answer. That's King George VI. King George VI is the daddy of the queen who just died. Her name is Queen Elizabeth II. That's her daddy. That's Queen Elizabeth's dad. Now, I don't know where Naftanya Rastafari Makanin got all of those ribbons and all of those awards, or why he got those ribbons and awards, because during the fight in the battle with Mussolini, Naftanya Rastafari Makanin was in England writing his biography, his autobiography. So you certainly can't fight a battle and write your autobiography at the same time. Like, how do you get are those ribbons for writing an autobiography? Like, are all of that, do you get all of that because it's certainly not the battlefield, because while the Ethiopians were fighting for their freedom and dealing with being gassed, chemical warfare from Mussolini, etc., while all that was taking place, Naftanya Rastafari Makanin was writing his autobiography in Bath, England. So how do you get the same uniform as King George VI, who is the father of Queen Elizabeth? See, Queen Elizabeth became queen because King George, her dad, died. Stop the genocide in Tigray. It is 680 days. I wonder if is that enough for tonight, or should I continue? I already gave you the fact that for some reason black folks or the world doesn't know that 5 to 6 million black folks were murdered by Naftanya Menelik II, but they know about the European Holocaust, and now they know everything that's taking place in Ukraine, but nobody knows anything that's happening in Tigray. I'm going to run that back. Everyone, young and old, can talk about, and rightly so, the Holocaust that took place in Europe, but they know nothing about 5 to 6 million that were murdered by a black man inside of Ethiopia. And we know everything that's happening inside of Ukraine, and we know nothing that's happening inside of Tigray. But I started going back to 2021, reading you statements from Secretary of State Tony Blinken and Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield. They knew then, they just don't know now. Stop the genocide in Tigray. I'm going to tell you something. But first, let me show something. I've shown this before. Maybe I'll show it again right now, because I've got to show you the mindset of what genocidal thinking produces. Because obviously there's a mindset inside of the South that says we are superior and those around us are inferior. And they might have even said things like, Amara Yazal Ng Itazism. Amara Yazal Ng Itazism. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Some 500,000 civilians murdered. 91% of Tigray's population in need of food. 120,000 girls and women raped. 80% of healthcare facilities destroyed. 50% of the population expected to be dead by now. Can you imagine 11 million individuals being reduced to 5 to 6 million? See, this is a culture and a tradition, and the way they're able to hide it is they're going to give you this word. Are you ready to hear this word? And I want you to think about this word in the 19th, 20th, and 21st century, particularly the 20th and the 21st century. See, this is recent history. Here's a word. Are you ready? Let me tell you how they've been hiding genocide. They've been hiding genocide under a simple word called famine. Famine. Think about it. When you hear that in your mind right now, you say, oh, 5 million people died because they were hungry, because of famine. This genocidal regime has been using food for a weapon for as long as anyone cares to remember. Food being used as a weapon. You're telling me right now in 2022 that there's anyone on this planet anywhere that's starving? That's virtually impossible. Unless you are starving individuals for military and using food as a weapon of war. Are you going to tell me right now, and it didn't make sense to me then, it makes sense to me now. Does everybody remember when we were singing We Are the World? Remember We Are the World? You remember the Irish potato famine? There was no potato famine. Them were Irish being starved to death. When we were singing We Are the World, it doesn't matter how much drought this world produces right now. There's enough food to get to individuals to save their lives, unless you've got a political motive to let masses of individuals die or be murdered because you haven't entered the Industrial Revolution and you haven't developed a nuclear bomb. So you can't kill people in mass like the Western powers can with nuclear weapons. You use antiquated weapons called starvation. And right now in Tigray, individuals are being starved. The world is watching. They know that there's enough food on this planet to where anybody who needs something to eat can have something to eat. But you got the world looking the other way in the same way they looked the other way when this fine man murdered 5 to 6 million individuals. Naftanya Menelik II. And what I'm doing is I'm showing you the trajectory because they're in partnership with European powers. And if you don't believe me, you cannot tell me that those uniforms are not similar. You can't tell me they're not on the same team. You can't tell me they have the same world view. Because they do. And if you don't believe me, I'm going to show you something. And then I'm going to go back and talk about a few more things. Somebody share this. I know it's hard to hear. I know it's easier to just say Ethiopia has never been colonized and they are the beacon of hope for all black people and oppressed people throughout the diaspora to show that we can fight back, we could push back. We weren't fighting back or weren't pushing back. You were in partnership and doing the exact same thing that European powers were doing to African nations. And guess what? Because you didn't consider yourself African. You didn't consider yourself Negro. You considered yourself superior in a land where you were conquering and colonizing with European weapons. Naftanya means rifle. And it was the European weapons that allowed for the mass destruction of individuals that was never seen anywhere on the planet until the 19th century. And that's why World War II was so devastating. That's why so many lives were lost in World War I. It wasn't because they were fighting longer or they were fighting harder. They had different technology and they were using weapons of mass destruction. And now they've got the nuclear bomb. Ethiopia doesn't have a nuclear bomb, so they have antiquated ways of killing large numbers of individuals, and it's called starvation. And it's also utilizing the fact of where you do not respect civilian lives. So you go through and you barricade them, you starve them, you bomb them, you destroy them as a weapon of war. It's antiquated. The modern world doesn't do that now, but the modern world is looking at this antiquated, backwards, Abiy Ahmed genocidal regime doing exactly what was done in the 19th century, and they don't care. Maybe this is too much. Let me show you a mindset that I've shown you in the past, but I think it's time to bring some of the old stuff we were showing in the past. Maybe we should just bring it forward and show you some of the things just in case some of you might have forgot. I'm going to give you the mindset of the superior, genocidal, occupying, colonizing way of thinking amongst black people, because many of you think that it's just a European thing, a Western thing, an American thing. No, it is not. There are people on the planet that believe in human rights and dignity, and there are those in power who do not. And I've just proven to you it doesn't matter what color the skin is. What matters is the story that you're fed that justifies what you're seeing. And I'm going to share with you a little bit about what that mindset looks like, and then I'll be back in just a moment.
Down from the Middle East, you are not native African.
No, not at all.
Ethiopian.
As a matter of fact, we don't have the Negro blood at all. And we migrated from the Semitic type of the Saudi Arabia and Yemen and the countries just away from the Red Sea. And the origin could be said that some people drafted and came to the northern part of Ethiopia. And then they migrated inwards. And time went on, they stayed and then the Hamitic races from the bordering, from the south and from Sudan and things like that, from the countries
but
in Africa.
Excuse me for interrupting, but if you don't have Negro blood, then this is news to me. The Ethiopians, I would think, wouldn't have any particular feeling about race relations in other parts of Africa.
We don't at all feel any relationship. It's none of our concern. I mean, we just don't care about it, as we don't have the Negro blood. We shouldn't have to worry ourselves. I mean, the color you might, the color of my face, it's just dark because it's due to the exposure of the sun. And my country is a mountainous country. It's 800 feet above sea level. And it's more or less nearer to the sun than is the other countries that lay near the equator.
Yuma?
Yeah.
You're not white?
And not black?
Not black. What are you?
It's just in between.
Yuma, and I would like to know, are you, for instance, very much interested in the South African race policy? Or do you stand more or less objective towards that?
Not at all. We wish you would do things fairly. I mean, you don't treat the native South Africans as you do right now. But as a matter of fact, we don't care. We just listen to your policies and things that go on in South Africa. But I'd like to ask you one question. Would it become more? I mean, would it be? Do you think it would be? A little.
I mean, Wait, just before.
Would the matter be worse or better? I mean, within these few years, or what is the stand right now of this South African problem?
Could I just ask you another question before I answer yours?
Yeah.
Is there any discrimination, for instance, between the separate tribes in your country? How do you, for instance?
I'm very happy you brought that point. As a matter of fact, the Amhara tribes consider ourselves superior to the other tribes, to the adjacent tribes that live in the same community. And we just consider them inferior and consider ourselves superior. And that could be something of segregation, but it's not actually in the sense that you take it and the Americans in Little Rock take it. I mean, it's just very unprominent.
I mean, do you mean that you think that the other tribes are perhaps a little too primitive, for instance?
Not a matter of primitiveness or so. It's just a matter of ignorance, I shall say.
Oh.
I mean, the Amhara tribes are more cute and clever. And that's why, they're just...
That's your tribe?
Yeah, that's my tribe. I'm proud of
very
it.
modest, yes.
Yeah.
And Yuma, do you have whites in Ethiopia? White people?
Foreigners?
White people, yes.
Yeah, lots of them. We have the Americans, as a matter of fact. They're working in different departments. And I'd like to say one point on that. They seem to be more cooperative in... they looked as though they are cooperative in my country. And I thought it was because they were in a foreign country that they should cooperate. But no, it's... I proved it right here. They come in, they have assemblies in communities and things like that. I mean, they are more cooperative than I actually saw it in my country.
Yuma, just to get back to another point, do you then think, for instance, it's fair that if there is discrimination in Ethiopia, even between, well, the same race and the same nation...
Not the same race, of course the same nation.
The same nation. But do you think then it's fair to judge South Africans as white towards black? If you don't, for instance, acknowledge the less good Ethiopians, well,
we do acknowledge them. I don't mean we don't actually consider our discrimination, what you call it, is not as prominent and worldwide known as it's in South Africa. That's it.
Well, what are we actually saying here? That there is all kinds of discrimination, and discrimination is all right as long as it isn't too prominent? Or as long as it isn't between black and white? What are we saying here anyway?
No, it's like this. She said, do you think the discriminations in your country is good, or the discrimination, the segregation...
Excuse me, let's hear from Susie on this, because Brazil's got a special point of view, I'm sure.
No, what they wanted to say is that he was telling her that she has discrimination. She's telling him he has...
Segregation, not discrimination.
I'm sorry, segregation. And she's telling him that he has a kind of segregation too. And he won't admit it.
I did. I just told you first of all. How did you happen to know it?
You consider your segregation different.
Yeah.
Yes, because you're all different.
Well, what's it like in Brazil, Susie?
Well, my country has a very good point, a point of advantage in that, because we have no segregation at all. And we could be in the same position as the United States, because we had slaves just the same as they did, just about the same time as they did. Only our country was a colony of Portugal. The United States was a colony of England. The Englands are Anglo-Saxons. The Portuguese are Latins. And the Latin race, I would say, mingles very easily. So there were marriages between black and white. They formed mulattoes, which are not black and are not white. They mingled and mingled and mingled. So now we don't have black and white. We have all sorts of colors, from white to very black, with light brown in between. And in Brazil, there's just no question if that person has a little Negro blood, like here in the States. He has 1/8 of Negro blood, he's considered a Negro. He has 1/16, he's considered white. We just don't have it. You look at the person, look at another one, and they're people. That's what's different. And I wanted to ask you something, Rena. You say there's a great segregation in your country.
That's right.
And in your country, do you have prejudices against the black people?
Well, I wouldn't actually say prejudices. Perhaps I should just explain this to you. Everybody seems to have heard of apartheid during the last few months, years. And I think it's perhaps misinterpreted in most instances. I'll tell you what apartheid actually means. It means the development of two separate racial groups within their own areas. And Susie, you said that.
Now I could go on with this. I could share more with you, but what you're hearing is, has anybody ever heard the term "the truth will come from the mouths of babes"? No matter what these adults try to tell you as it relates to the history of Ethiopia, and they will attempt to tell you that that was just a young man who is somehow uninformed. He is actually very informed. He is representative of what's known as the Amhara elite. That man went on to work as ambassadors and representative and all of those different things, and he's representing a point of view that has been imposed on most individuals who have been colonized. And so let's just break that down for just a second. Or should we stop right here? Because he talked to you about the fact that, one, we are not from there. We're like from Yemen, like from Arabia, like with it. And then we migrated down. He made his way all the way to Shua, south. The history we're talking about is the history of the South right now. And what happened when he said we are superior? We are more beautiful. Where did he end up and how did he make his living? And how did his parents survive? And how did he get that education, which began to be open to a certain elect group of individuals? And what is the Lasan Nagus? And what happened to all of those Oromo, or all of those Cushitic individuals that were now in touch with this mindset? So much so to where you've got individuals saying we're not from there. So they're obviously colonizing someone and someone's. Let me ask you about this individual on the right who identifies with the man on the left. What do you think his mindset was growing up and being around and being amongst the ruling elite of the Shuan Amharic Christian tradition? What do you think his mindset is? His mindset is exactly the mindset of this young man who is representing him. His mindset is of one of superiority. By the way, Neftanya Ross Tafari Makanin, I told you Makanin is the name of his father, went on to become Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was born in the middle of a colony amongst individuals who didn't speak his language, but did everything to make sure his house was repaired, his schooling was taken care of, the spoils of war went to him, the Amhara are destroyed, the Oromo are destroyed. And if you were an Oromo who didn't want to be destroyed, then you needed to partner with the empire. And that's why you've got many folks who speak Amharic thinking they're Amhara, when in fact they were Oromo. They're Oromo now. They've been Oromo then, but they speak Amharic because they had to include themselves in the empire so as not to be destroyed. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Maybe I'll just wrap this up because I want to kind of see. I'm telling you, this is Ethiopia. The part in the north, as a matter of fact, most of you call that Abyssinia. There's a church in Harlem. It's not called the Ethiopian church. It's called the Abyssinian church. So now let's make a distinction between Abyssinia and Ethiopia. But let's make a distinction between the North and the South. Let's make a distinction between the Shuan Amharic Christian elite, Shuan Amharic Christian elite that destroyed anything that wasn't Shuan, Amharic, and Christian. And if you didn't want to be destroyed, you needed to be merged into the kingdom. And that's why you have so many different ethnicities that don't have their own traditions. They have been practicing the traditions of the colonizer. From their coffee ceremony to their dances to their songs and to everything else as part of the Lasan Nagus. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Now, there's something that's very interesting. There's always been a power. Remember, Naftanya Menelik the second called himself the king of Shua and all of the Gala. He called himself the king of Shua. There's something interesting in that title because it wasn't the king of kings. His king was Johannes, and he did everything to undermine his king, Johannes, who allowed him to be the king of Shua. See, Johannes was from the north. And as a matter of fact, Johannes was from Tigray. And most of the battles that you're talking about of Africans defeating Europeans was not via Menelik. Menelik was from the south. The Battle of Adwa is in Tigray. That man knew nothing about the mountains of Tigray. He was on the hills of Johannes, who whipped the Ottomans, who whipped the Egyptians, who whipped the Italians. That was the north. That's the history of Tigray that they don't want you to know about. And all of this domination that is taking place in the South is taking place while the North is fighting the Italians, fighting the Egyptians, and then later going in to the Sudan and was fighting the Mahdi. And so while Tigray is being destroyed via war, you've got Menelik and his ilk and Makanin, Haile Selassie's daddy, extorting the individuals from the south and plundering their crops, their gold, their minerals, and everything else to build up that southern empire, which now is defined by what you call Addis Ababa. Addis Ababa is nowhere near Aksum. So now you're starting to see why there is an attempt to exterminate the Tagaru, because Tigray has never submitted to the South. And you've got individuals who are saying Ethiopia. When they say Ethiopian, they're saying everybody should merge into the Lasan Nagus, give away their identity, and participate in the colonizing tradition. And guess what? The worst thing could have happened to them along the way. Are you ready? You want to know why this is really painful to the Shuan and Amharic Christian elite? And by the way, all that came to an end in 1974 when Haile Selassie on the right, who has all of the ribbons and all of the medals, while writing his biography in Bath, England. All of a sudden you get medals for fleeing and writing an autobiography while your people are fighting. Well, let's continue. Do you want me to tell you the worst thing that has happened to the Shuan Amharic Christian elite? Are you ready? His name was Meles Zenawi. Meles Zenawi. Now you've got the Southern Empire under the control for 27 years by Meles Zenawi. Do you know what Meles Zenawi was? Tigrayan. Now you've got the death of Meles Zenawi, which I would call an assassination, because it's very interesting. Those who fight for their own people always seem to be murdered or die early. But those who are in leadership positions that make sure all of their resources are given to the Western powers, they live long lives. Meles Zenawi came up with something called the Renaissance Dam. Look it up. The Renaissance Dam. What does Ethiopia have that Egypt does not? And some of you don't realize that the British ran Egypt for 100 years. 100 years. They just didn't call it a colony, but they ran it for 100 years in the same way Ethiopia has been run by individuals via the Witch Hell Treaty, advisors, administrators. Didn't you hear the young man answer the question when that young lady asked him, do you have Europeans inside of Ethiopia? He said yes. What he should have told her is yes, they're in positions of power. They run the administration. They're the ones that help make sure bridges got there. They're the ones that made sure that the trains got there. They're the ones that made sure that all of the inner workings of what you call the modern merging into a nation state, that was produced by those Europeans that young man didn't know to tell the young lady that they were there running everything. And if you don't believe me, I'll break down the names of the individuals who ran the government of Menelik, Haile Selassie, and onward and further as you can imagine. So yes, they were there. And what were they doing? Running it. Here's the problem with Egypt. Egypt, and I've seen a lot of individuals who've traveled to Egypt. You notice it never rains. You ever see anybody in Egypt with an umbrella? Stop the genocide in Tigray. I'm giving you some geopolitical information right now. And I think it's a wrap. Maybe that's enough for tonight. But I will say this, it never rains in Egypt. And if it does, it's probably going to be a great time for celebration. Guess where Egypt gets its water? From the Nile. Guess where it rains? Ethiopia. Guess who needs the water? Egypt. Guess who stands in the way? Meles. What does he do? Renaissance Dam. You making these connections yet? Now, guess who ran Ethiopia for 27 years? The Tigrayan, the man who was born in Adwa. As a matter of fact, I was traveling once from Aksum down into heading down to Adwa. There's a big statue of Meles Zenawi pointing to where he was born, like that way. And that is exactly where the Battle of Adwa took place, where Meles Zenawi was born. The Tagaru ran Ethiopia for 27 years, and the Amharic elite are making sure that will never happen. And so they got a person by the name of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was raised as an Oromo, but he's an Amharic, and that's why the first thing he did was bomb the Oromo, and is working in behalf of the Amharic elite, or the Shuan Amharic Christian tradition. But remember, that all came to an end with the overthrow of the final emperor by the name of Haile Selassie. And here's something else they won't tell you. Haile Selassie was buried under a toilet for 17 years. Stop the Genocide in Tigray. I don't know if any of this has been helpful, but you got to wrap your mind around colonization. And you got to ask the question, can Ethiopia, and I'm being very specific, I'm talking about that outgrowth of Shua, can it abandon its genocidal culture? And I don't think it can, because you're seeing in 2022, the genocidal game plan is being played right now. And what we're going to say in the future is, oh, all of those individuals died of famine. In 2022, folks died of famine. There wasn't enough food. That means if you buy that lie, you're complicit. 2022, nobody's starving to death. Those are political weapons used to make the Tigray submit, and the Tigray are never going to submit. No matter how much Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed tries, and the thing that he did is united the Tigray around the world. And long when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is gone, and he goes the way of what was the Derg's name? That Mengistu, another butcher. Mengistu, another butcher. I'm talking 5 to 6 million individuals. Some of you all are talking about, oh yeah, there was some human rights abuses. You know, there was some land taken and 30 people were killed and some protesters. I'm talking 5 to 6 million people being murdered. And now I'm talking about individuals in Tigray who are children, elders. They have nothing to do with a battle or a war. Their only crime is being Tigray. And the world is watching this. Stop the genocide in Tigray. I'll close with this. Like I love to share. Remember the Amnesty International report that I keep talking about? And what I'll do is I'll just change a little bit of the story today, because there's lots of stories in here. I don't know if they realized I was a person. Didn't you hear in that young man's speech that he didn't realize that these individuals were persons or people? He's superior. There's an Amnesty International report called I Don't Know If They Realized I Was a Person. And it documents Eritrean troops inside of Tigray, as indicated by the ambassador earlier in this conversation and in this 2-year ongoing conflict. Women are having items removed from their vaginas that have been placed inside of their vaginas. Gang raped, systemically raped. The report says rape and other sexual violence in Tigray. I don't know if they realized I was a person. Let me see this. The father of a 10-year-old girl was raped, and she continues to suffer physical and mental consequences. Now she has serious cramps in her stomach and suspected that she would be testing positive for HIV. 28-year-old mother of 2 raped by Amhara forces near the border of Sudan. See, we're going to still act like we don't know any of this stuff. Well, maybe if you understand what they're attempting to do in the north, they have been doing in the south since Menelik's grandfather, or the tradition of that Shuan empire. Let me give you an example of what a Geber is, a Geber. And we'll close with this. Since we don't realize that there's genocide and there's also a tradition of genocide. No sooner has the peasant unloaded the tribute due to the Lord that the latter congratulates the peasant for having come in just the right time and sends him somewhere beyond the Awash, to which the peasant is supposed to bring a load of teff. And then he goes to have to build the home. He has to repair these houses. He has to do all these different things. This is in his own land, by the way. Study the word Naphtinia. Study the word Geber, and then you'll be able to understand the world that this royal individual is born into, who believes he's superior. Just think about this. The basic conclusion of this story is the man starves to death while feeding and taking care of the colonizers' livelihood inside of his own land. Here's the final sentence the final portion that we've read in the past, but I want you to hear it again. When at last he dies, the Lord's household servants carry out the body on a stick, and after a few scratches, digs, and they bury him in a ditch. Oh, the peasant's donkey? No problem. Someone has helped himself to it, and the peasant lay dying below the fence. A lady living nearby asks a lady of the Lord's household, "Sister, I saw a dead body leaving your household for burial today. Who could he possibly be?" "Don't mind him, sister," retorts the lady from the Lord's household. "He was not human born. He was only a Geber." The question remains, can Ethiopia, and we're talking about the South, we're talking about that kingdom of Shua that expanded, destroyed, plundered, pillaged, and believes that it can make its way up north, and is recoiling from the fact that Meles Zenawi was running it for 27 years, and the fact that the Tagaru were in charge of Menelik, who could not claim he was the king of kings. The only reason Johannes died is because he was fighting the Muslims, the Mahdi. Had he not died in battle, you probably wouldn't even know of a Menelik. And had it not been for Ras Alula, one of the greatest generals ever known, you probably wouldn't even know about a battle of Adwa. You wouldn't even know about the defeat of the Egyptians and the Italians and all of these other dynamics. Can Ethiopia shed its genocidal culture? I'm not sure. It's taking place right now in 2022. Stop the Genocide in Tigray. I've said enough. Should I just give you an opportunity? Here's what I'll do in the final moments. If you want to join this conversation, you've got a question, I've said something, maybe I'm making some stuff up. Maybe what I said is not true. Maybe you have something to add to this conversation. I think what I'll do is I'll hang around for a few moments. And I'll hit this link right now. Let's just see if it's working. And if anybody has an update in terms of what's happening in Tigray right now, I'd love to hear it. I understand that they are bombing Mekelle once again as we speak. I'm going to say join the conversation. Here's the link. Here's the link. Any updates? Love to hear from you. And it's right there. Any questions, any comments, anything that I didn't clarify, didn't get right? And as a matter of fact, we're just getting close to the T. Just getting close to it. Now, with that being said, what I will do is I'm going to copy this link. I'm going to pin it so you don't have to find it. All right, you all. And yes, by the way, Adwa is in Tigray. For those of you who are studying or thinking about the Battle of Adwa, that is in Tigray. And by the time by the time Menelik came about and there was the Battle of Tigray, if you know this word called Ascari, what the Italians were able to do was to recruit a bunch of Africans from all over to fight the battle for them, because they could not keep up with not only the altitude, but the strategies, the fighting, the determination of those who were fighting at the Battle of Tigray. Those were largely black troops that were commanded by European troops. The actual defeat of the Italians took place with Rasulullah defending and defeating the Italians, so much so they've got what's called the Plaza of the 500 in Italy right now. If you haven't heard of the Plaza of the 500, those are the ones that were slaughtered attempting to fight in Tigray. Let's look it up. There used to be a monument in front of that train station, and now they've hidden it. So you got to go find it. Like most of this history has been hidden. You've got to go find it. But thanks to Abiy Ahmed, more individuals are looking for it and more people are finding it. Before we get out of there, I got to check in with my good brother and friend. I got to check in with Amir so we can see about an update. Brother Amir, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, brother Jeff. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam. It's good to see you. Hear from you, Amir. Let me just ask. I've shared a lot today. Do you got any updates from Tigray? What's going on? And do you think that Ethiopia, and what I'm saying is I'm describing it from the south, the Shuans forward. Do you think that they can shed their genocidal history, legacy, culture, or just being? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, before that's a very good question, brother Jeff. Before I go to the update, I wanted to ask some things on the issue that you were talking about in regards to the matter of where you have a few elite, the Naftanya elite, where they engaged in criminality, genocide, including right out slavery in Ethiopia. For centuries you had Menelik. Menelik, he was selling and buying slaves in Ethiopia, selling them to the outsiders. He was making a lot of money, selling and including, keeping slaves. This actually happened all the way until Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was also engaging in slavery. So the Naftanyas are actually the master of slavery, trade. And the video that you just showed us is a clear evidence of the mentality of Naftanya, because I wanted to actually say something about that video that you showed. That young man that you saw came to America with the money of the slave that was being traded in Ethiopia, of the backbone and money of the innocent farmers Ethiopia, with the poor money, simply because he's a Naftanya. So he came to America, and you saw him, the way he was responding, that he was actually claiming that he's not black, but rather, I don't know what race he was claiming, because when you look at his face, he's like me, he's like you, he's like anyone else. He has hair that is, a similarity of the African, and the face just like me, just like any African. But he was outright saying that he's not black. And this is actually the behavior of the Naftanya. For centuries, when they come in this country, if you ask them, if they are Ethiopian, if they are black, they will say, no, I'm not black. They will say, I'm actually not black, but I'm Ethiopian. So what is Ethiopia? They will say, we are mixed with the whites, we are mixed with the Arab, we are mixed with the Indian. So they always try to stay away from anything that has to do with black. Now, this individual that you showed the video, he's actually right now like 60-something years old. Do you know, Brother Jeff? He actually, now he lives in Addis Ababa. He is a representative. Abiy Ahmed gave him a position to become an African envoy, something like that, to the IGAD. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
You can hear me, yeah. So he gave him a position. Right now, he's some kind of envoy to the Africa. So we have an issue. This is really a big issue where you have individual elite that claim, even if you look at the mentality of the Solomonic dynasty, they claim that they come from the Arab or from the Israel. They don't even claim that they come from, they don't even claim that they are proud African. I would tell you another story, Brother Jeff. I think the audience in here, they know. When King Haile Selassie, when he came in here to America, I don't know if you know this story. President Kennedy invited him, actually, so he came to America. And at that time, I think it was during the President Kennedy, I believe. I think at that time, black people were not allowed to go inside the White House. So you know what he told to President Kennedy and to other officials in there? He told King Haile Selassie told them that he is not black. He's actually white. He told them he's white. He's a descendant of Solomon, and that's why they allowed him to go inside the White House. So these are the mentality. They always try to stay away from their blackness. They always try to stay away from their African heritage. This has been their key ingredient of this Naftanya and this elite Naftanya of the Ethiopian. So I'm glad that you showed that video so that the audience can be updated. Now, in regards to the update that you mentioned, Brother Jeff, we have so many things happening in Ethiopia. As you know, the Abiy regime, the Abiy Ahmed regime is bombing, just bombed before yesterday, and including yesterday, he bombed again the station, the radio, including the TV station of Dims Wayane. He bombed it, and he created many casualties. And now what we are witnessing is that he is engaged in bombing using aerial bombardment. Now there is a possibility, Brother Jeff, that some agents of Abiy Ahmed are inside the Mekelle. It is possible that they are giving him some kind of remote direction. Obviously, the place that he is bombing, I don't know where he is getting. So the Tigray government are investigating these matters because there are some within enemies. I think possibly that he sent them, or I don't know how he sent them, but maybe some agents that are inside Tigray that are actually giving him guidance to the aerial bombardment, and that's what is happening now. As we have talked earlier, Brother Jeff, what Abiy Ahmed, what he is doing as of now is that he is trying to use all the weapons that he has amassed in the last 6 months or 8 months, and he's trying to use them, all the weapons, until he finished. Once he finished, and then he's going to go back to the peace process. So I think that's what we are witnessing right now, Brother Jeff.
Amir, I just typed in my email. I want you to, shoot me your contact information because I'm always looking to connect with you and get updates from you. I appreciate it so much. It's very interesting to see that for 680 days, there seems to be a lack of attention and Dr. Tedros mentioned this. He even went so far as to say that, you know, it's very clear. We could tell that this is a racial dynamic. If this was happening anywhere in Europe, it wouldn't have taken 6 days, let alone 680 days to address it. I really want to get to the question: do you think that Ethiopia, as we know it and as I described it, can pivot away from believing that they can merge everyone into a common identity, which is the culture of the king, the history of Shua, etc. And I don't know how they think anyone would really go for that. Is the empire able to change, or are they just going to genocide their way through every epic until the empire implodes?
Well, I think that you know, in regards to the Tedros Adhanom, you know, what he said is precisely correct. You know, the quote that you mentioned, what he said in terms of if you know, the Tigrayan, if they were light-skinned, or if they were you know, the color that they have, if it was different color, it is possible. It is 100% sure, as he has noted, Brother Jeff, that I think the action of the Western countries would have been much different than we witness today. Today, it's just a verbal, it just, as you see them, it's just a condemnation word, there's no action. So if let's say, you know, the Tigrayan, if they happen to be, if they had the skin color of the Ukraine or of the Kosovo, you know, remember the Kosovo, I think the action would have been different, in my opinion. And I share that that view that he noted. And that, by the way, we have to praise him in that regard, Brother Jeff, because that takes a lot of gut to say something like that while you are sitting in a position of a high position. So I do applaud Mr. Tedros Adhanom to say such a powerful word. You know,
I'm pleased with him for being being Tagaru and speaking up, because in times of crisis, in times of attack, individuals sometimes put their heads down, and Dr. Tedros has stood tall, he's got his shoulders out, and is advocating on behalf of and speaking to what others are not, you know, willing to say. I will say this, Brother Amir, that the Tagaru are not just going to go away and allow themselves to be exterminated. There have been many have tried. I mean, the history is long. The what's been called famines and starvation and attacks and all of that, even in the midst of having their land destroyed by war and all kinds of other different, you know, factors. Tigray Tisser, they still fight forward and are not going anywhere. And I'm pretty sure they are not going to submit based on revenge, or whatever they want to call it. Human rights are being violated and the world is watching, and it's been 680 days. I'm going to continue raising my voice, and I know you are, and everybody who's listening, please share this talk. We've got 500,000 been killed, 91% of the population in need of food, 120,000 girls and women raped. I mean, these types of numbers should really be unacceptable. 80% of the healthcare facilities destroyed, and in Mekelle, we just saw a hospital destroyed last week. However, the fight, the spirit of the Tagaru still is shining bright. Wouldn't you say that, Amir?
Absolutely, and I'm also on the view that the determination and the history and also the courage to stand up for their right and to be to live in dignity, I think they have shown throughout history. The Tigrayan, you know, as you rightly noted, Brother Jeff, the Tigrayan are not invading, are not taking, are not conquering another land or another town. What is happening is that, as we all know, the Ethiopian government is actually going inside Tigray and invading the nation of Tigray and bombing the nation and the people of Tigray. You know, so no other nation, no other people will remain silent while they are being bombed, raped, and looted. That just it never happened. You know. On top of that, we are witnessing that the Ethiopian government is also sending their troops for what? Simply because the people of Tigray, and including their rightfully elected government, demanding that they want to live in peace. They want to live in a government they have elected. They want to live in a form, in a way, in a culture, in a norm of their own, of their upbringing, of their understanding of life. And the Ethiopian government, as we have discussed earlier, since they come from the culture of the Naftanya, they are refusing. They are saying, no, you have to bow down to their mentality, to the mentality of the Naftanya. This is simply the typical behavior that we witnessed during the Minilik, where he went all the way to the Oromo, he went all the way to all the region, to Tigray, he went to Gojam, he went to other nation in Tigray, and he forced them to his own rule. And Abiy Ahmed is following the typical behavior of Menelik the second, that was ruling in Ethiopia back in the day. So we're just witnessing Ethiopia coming back to that empire mentality, which is very dangerous. And let me say this, Brother Jeff. If Ethiopia does not disassociate itself from this mentality of empire mentality, where everyone has to be under one yoke, under one rule, under one thumb, and then we are going to witness Ethiopia going back to the era of Zemene Mesafint. I think the era of Zemene Mesafint is called in English the era of the princes. The era of the princes is that during the era of princes, everyone lived on their own region, everyone lived in their own way of life. Only when Tedros came to power was Ethiopia forced to become under one form of government. So one thing is that, Brother Jeff, Ethiopian empiristic mentality has to stop, and if it doesn't stop, it is going to destroy it, and it just is going to become another Somalia, in my opinion, Brother Jeff.
Well, I want to say thank you, Amir, for giving us that update. And you're very right, and you touched on all of the points that I was attempting to understand, because I don't know if Ethiopia, as we know it today, this modern empire, has the capacity to move into the 21st century. And you rightly noted that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is just utilizing the same tactics of the old empire, moving that forward, where modern nations are dealing with the rule of law. They've gone from subjects to citizens, and I don't believe that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed understands those concepts. It's a shame. You mentioned the Zemene Mesafint, and you're absolutely correct. That was the time of instability, roaming leaders. Everyone had their own space, their own tent, but there was no stability. There was no security until Tedros was able, through force, to bring everyone beneath what's known as a king of kings. Well, the empire is supposed to have been moving forward and have ended in 1974, but I think the mentality is very, very clear. Those who have been in power, I mean, you've got to remember, thinking of Haile Selassie, he had to fight that mentality to bring in some of the modern ways of being, while at the same time having the traditional ways of being. And here we are in 2022, and starvation is still being used as a weapon. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Martha says, do you have any evidence to support your allegations? There is war indeed. Ethiopians are dying irrespective of their tribe. This is an internal conflict. We shall overcome. We don't need the intervention of non-Ethiopians. Martha, thank you for that comment. And let's unpack it, since you have some questions in there, Martha. And if you'd like, you can go ahead and hit that link, and you and I can have a conversation, and Amir can jump in. However, I'm not sure you know what a non-Ethiopian is, because a non-Ethiopian, according to the history I outlaid, was anyone that was not a part of the Amhara elite tradition of conquest inside the southern portions of what you now call Ethiopia. And so I would ask you, is what is your definition of an Ethiopian? Because as it relates to the Greeks, they just said that that was the land, or that was the people of the burnt skin, in other words, black. And so, Martha, I wonder if you consider yourself black, because the Greeks certainly would have considered you black. And if you talk about Ethiopia and non-Ethiopians, what do you think of as Ethiopia? My question would be, where's your voice when Ethiopians, if in fact that's what you call them, are being systemically raped? And if you say that all Ethiopians, regardless of their tribe, are being impacted by war, where's your voice as it relates to the siege and the isolation of a particular people? So, Martha, rather than saying you don't need intervention, maybe you should intervene and make sure that the genocide is stopped where the most heinous and worst humanitarian crisis in the world is taking place. I wonder where your voice is. And if we were waiting for individuals who are like perhaps you and others, who are saying nothing, perhaps doing nothing, and maybe even in your hearts of hearts hate Tagaru individuals and have been raised to do so because of this ideal of superiority, I'm wondering what your thoughts are when your fellow Ethiopians were clapping and dancing when individuals were being thrown over cliffs. I wonder where your voice is as it relates to not needing intervention from non-Ethiopians when Ethiopians have realized that folks are being burned to death in 2022, starved to death. Martha, my question to you would probably be, what is your solution? What are your thoughts? Do you say stop the genocide in Tigray, or are you actually saying be quiet while we allow another genocide and the tradition of genocide to continue? Because if that's what you're asking us non-Ethiopians to do, well, then you are going to be terribly saddened by the fact that our voice is going to get louder and louder, because in 2022 there should not be a genocide taking place anywhere in the world. And it seems to me that you're close to a genocide. Your voice should be louder than mine. Martha, hit that link if you want to talk to Brother Jeff. I'm right here. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Amir, I think that genocide and I think human rights abuses are a global issue. I don't think you get to say, be quiet while we kill certain people. It's none of your business. As a humanitarian, I think it's my business, and I'm sad that there are individuals, Amir, that might think it's not their business. A genocide is taking place at 680 days. When you think about 680 days, Amir, can you even fathom the fact that we're even having this conversation?
Well, I mean, it is very, very unfortunate that it is taking this long, 680 days. And we have yet to witness any kind of tangible action from the world, including from those that can actually take some action to stop this war. Now, Brother Jeff, I think you said it very well in regard to Martha comment. Martha comment is not only her comment, but is a lot of Ethiopians who adhere to that kind of philosophy, which is that the conflict in Ethiopia is an internal conflict, therefore you should not be involved because it is not your business, to anyone. So, this kind of thinking is that it would be perfect, if they're saying that don't involve in our internal conflict, Brother Jeff, then let's turn around that question and then ask them to people like Martha. Sorry, I had to mention her name, but I don't mean to pick on her name. It's just there are many, many people who adhere to that kind of philosophy. And I want to turn it around that question and say, Brother Jeff, so why is Eritrea involved in Ethiopia attacking the Tigray? Why is the UAE helping Ethiopia in attacking the Gulf? If the notion of this is an internal, therefore do not involve, we don't need anyone from outside, we don't need anyone non-citizen or non-Ethiopian or non-whatever, If that is the argument that they want to hold on, they want to stand on, and my question is, why are you involving Eritrean, UAE, Turkey, China, and other non-Ethiopian forces to come and loot and engage in rape and destroy Tigray? So that's the question I have. I don't want to mention her name because I respect her opinion, but to people who adhere to that kind of notion where this is our internal conflict and don't involve. And that's one point that I want to raise. The second point that I want to give to that question is that also, let's say there is a conflict between a wife and a husband, or there is a conflict between two business people. There is a conflict. You don't say, this is our internal matter. It doesn't work that way in this world.
Yeah, well,
other people have to come and also look at the issue, and because we live in a world that is global, that is updated almost every second through our technology. So if there is a crime happening, if there is injustice happening, just like Martin Luther King said, anywhere injustice is everywhere injustice.
There you go.
I'm not sure about the proper quote, but
no,
something like that emphasis put in there. So that's my response to her brother Jeff.
Well, thank you, Martha, for at least Martha. Thank you for the intelligent question and even the spirit of your question, because I believe that we're going to always have to figure out a way to dialogue and find common ground. But rape is never a good thing. Starvation is never a good thing. And folks who turn away while horrible acts are occurring in their world, I question that. I'm sure you're doing everything that you can to raise your voice. And early on, there used to be folks that would come in and say that I was not informed and it was not true. And then Abiy Ahmed said, well, it actually is true. We do have Eritrean troops here. So I don't know, Martha. Thank you. If you got any other questions, that's fine. Didi Wario, Didi
Wario, yeah.
Wario, thank you.
Hi, Brother Jeff. Thank you very much. I just want to make quick points with regard to this. This is our internal affairs nonsense. I'm saying this because this kind of nonsense failed Rwanda. There was this kind of, this is internal affairs, it's internal affairs sort of nonsense that facilitated the horrible genocide that took place in Rwanda. So that is one. And the second is the crimes that Ethiopia is perpetrating against the Oromo, against the Tagaru, and others for that matter, goes beyond the boundaries of Ethiopia. Every genocide, Ethiopia is perpetrating these crimes, not just against the nations I just mentioned, Oromo, Tagaro, and the rest of it. It is crimes perpetrated against the entire world, against every nation that is a party or that is signatory to the International Human Rights Conventions, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and every convention that criminalizes using genocide, using starvation, deliberate starvation, rape, and torture as weapon. That is what Ethiopia is doing. Ethiopia has violated all the treaties and conventions that it has signed. Ironically, it has signed, be it using child soldiers, be it using all kinds of degrading treatments, genocide, and so these are crimes perpetrated against all nations, and every human being has a moral entitlement to speak against that. That is one point I want to make. And second, the person, I don't want to mention the name, who is trying to say this is Ethiopia's internal affairs. What constitutes Ethiopia? I mean, the problem that, like I said, I wrote in text is, it's not just this government or that government of Ethiopia. The problem is Ethiopia itself is a problem. Ethiopia itself is a problem. I make that statement again because Ethiopia is an empire that was conceived by violence and genocide and stabbing Africans in the back. That is how Ethiopia was born. That is how Ethiopia has been maintained. The war in Tigray, the war in Oromia is being conducted to maintain Ethiopia. When Abiy Ahmed declared war in Tigray, about 5 or 6 months before the 4th of November 2020, he said, if Tigray goes ahead with this election, buildings will crumble, children will die, mothers will cry. And he did that exactly as he declared, having been joined, of course, by Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea and these unscrupulous international actors. And when it comes to Oromia, that is the same narrative, okay? The government, the PP government, and PP stands for Prosperity Party in the quotation, have said this in the parliament in Oromia in December 2021. We've got to dry up the sea in order to finish the fish, or in order to get rid of the fish. And PP said that in response to the question put to them. The question was this: why have you not been able to contain the Oromo Liberation Army? And the answer was, we've got to dry up the sea. By that, they meant we've got to wipe out the Oromo in order to force the Oromo Liberation Army to surrender. So the killings that are being taking place, the arbitrary killings, including innocent children and elders, mothers, up and down Oromia, is part of the implementation of we've got to dry up the sea in order to get rid of the fish. And so that's why I say Ethiopia itself is a problem. And with regard to Ethiopia came out of the process of the Scramble for Africa, simple question that you've got to ask yourself is, who negotiated the boundaries of Ethiopia, if there is any? The boundary that Ethiopia shares with Sudan was negotiated by Menelik in 1902 with Britain. You can read 1902 Anglo-Ethiopian Treaty. In the north, the boundaries were negotiated with Italy by virtue of the Wuchale Treaty that led to the Adwa War, even after Italy was defeated. After Italy faced ignominious defeat at the Battle of Adwa, what Menelik did was sat down with Italy and signed Addis Ababa Treaty, October 1896. You can look up that, by which he recognized Italy's occupation of the northeastern part of Africa, and which he allowed her to continue to occupy. In return, he received firearms that he used to invade Oromia, Walaita, and all the countries in the current day Ethiopia. In East, the boundaries between Kenya and Sudan Kenya and Ethiopia were negotiated by Britain and Middle Kingdom. That is how nations split up. That is how Somalia split into 4 countries. Afar nation, one nation that was split into 3. That is how the Oromo nation was split into 2. Part of northern Kenya, as you know, Oromo. So that is the mess out of which Ethiopia came into being. And that is the ticking time bomb, which is going off here and there. I mean, Ethiopia claims to have Sudan occupying headland. So, yeah, I'm sorry if I've taken a long time, but that's kind of points I wanted to make.
No,
Brother Jack.
Don't go anywhere, because I think that what you're saying is so very important, and I believe that many listeners will benefit by understanding, the current situation that we are seeing as it relates to this extreme violence. I mean, this is inhumane. I mean, the level of and the intensity of hatred to say, you know what, I will strangle you until you come into submission it's not unheard of, because remember, Sherman did that same tactic in his March to the Sea, where they started to involve citizens in the war planning and said things like, take everything except the mother's eye so that they can cry. I mean, the intense hatred that we are seeing displayed in 2022 is unheard of. Didi Wario, you mentioned the violent origins of the creation of Ethiopia. Do you see a time where they'll be able to pivot away from violence and move from subjects to citizens, or forge a new story? Or is it just going to constantly be violence, violence, violence?
Well, if Ethiopia was, violence is in the DNA of Ethiopia. I mean, that is how Ethiopia came into being. And it has been tried for more than a century and a quarter to kind of make Ethiopia a peaceful place, but it has not been possible. So I think the way out is, maybe people might not want to hear this, but the reality on the ground is Ethiopia is coming to an end. Ethiopia, at the moment, as it stands, it is not a sovereign entity at the moment. Why it is not a sovereign entity? In order for a state to be considered as a state, at least it has to have one defined boundary. It has to have a population that accept the state, and it has to have government. At least the 3 pillars need to be there. But when you see that with Ethiopia's practical reality, Ethiopia's boundaries are not clearly defined still now. It was just the best example for that is the tension between Sudan and Ethiopia. The recurrent conflict along the borders between Kenya and Ethiopia. Even Djibouti is making certain plans. Somalia's forces, some might call them Islamists, but they are Somalia's forces, are fighting, in the boundaries of Ethiopia. I'm not referring to the Ogaden. The Ogaden forces are fighting for independence. That is one. Which population is accepting Ethiopia as my country? Is it the Oromo? Is it the Tigray who are facing genocide? Or is it the Gambela population, more than 80% of whom are citizens of South Sudanese? And historically, Gambela was traded for Kassala. Britain took Kassala, the province of Kassala, and traded for Gambela, which Britain gave to Ethiopia's empire. There is no nation. If you speak to any Somali or any Gambela person or any Oromo person, we don't consider Ethiopia as our country. I'm Oromo by citizen. My country is Oromia. As simple as that. That would be the same answer you would get if you speak to a Somali person, and even if you speak to Afar person. So with regard to the government, there is no sovereign government in Ethiopia. The Prosperity Party came to power before it was even legally established. It was only after they came to power that they were constituted and that were legally registered by the Electoral Board. So just because they happen to have control of the bank and the tank doesn't make them a sovereign government. And finally, let me say this. Ethiopia is coming to an end, and that is a natural course of action. So if it is facing the same fate of Yugoslavia, which is great. I mean, if this curse called Ethiopia is removed from the world map, then same peace will prevail among the Oromo, Tigray, Sidama, Walaita, and the rest of the countries or nations in Empire Ethiopia. Mind you, the former Yugoslav member countries are enjoying better peace and better peaceful coexistence than they did under the entity called Yugoslavia. That is the reality that's happening on the ground. I mean, I don't buy into the nonsense of, if Ethiopia collapses, then we're going to face the scenario of Syria or Libya. That's absolute nonsense. Anybody who could read and understand can comprehend it. The scenario of Syria is completely different. In Syria, people are fighting to change the government. There are people who share the same culture, the same language, and probably majority of them share the same religion, historical background. When it comes to Ethiopia, it is different sovereign entities that were invaded and incorporated into Empire of Ethiopia by force as part of the process of the scramble for Africa, or the process of the partitioning of Africa. I mean, there are in public domain, there are letters that Emperor Menelik would write to participants of the Berlin Conference saying, okay, if you are scrambling Africa among yourself, then I'm not going to sit and watch. I'm going to have to take my part. That's how Ethiopia came into being, and that is the reason why Ethiopia cannot see peace. It hasn't seen peace, and it cannot see peace because that is not how Ethiopia was programmed.
Wow. Well, I could tell you, Amir and Wario, my email is right there. I hope you both shoot me an email. I've got some questions for both of you. But before I go, I've got this thought, Wario, in terms of, I was talking earlier about Rastafari Makanin, being born in a land outside of Harar where he didn't speak the language. The people around him were, subjects. His father was the governor of Harar. And what kind of mentality do you think he grew up with, being surrounded by an entire people that were the undergird of his prosperity or his livelihood, and seeing his father going off to battle to destroy individuals? Like, what kind of mindset do you think Haile Selassie grew into, and how did he carry that mindset forward into, this empire?
I think with regard to Haile Selassie, there was this long-standing myth, which goes like, we are descendants of King Solomon of Israel, because they say, as Christian, I find that blasphemous, because they say, it's written in the Bible that the Queen of Sheba, which was the Queen of Ethiopia, happened to visit Israel, and she slept with King Solomon of Israel, conceived a child, and that child was called Menelik the First, and I don't want to go into the detail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is written in the first ever written constitution of Ethiopia, 1931, revised in 1955. So Haile Selassie, and Tafari Mokonnin, some people say he's got an Oromo blood. Yeah, he might have an Oromo blood, but he never considered himself as an Oromo. He always considered himself as non-African, if you like. I mean, if the constitution states we are descendants of King Solomon of Israel, by default they're saying we're not African. And that video, which went viral about one of the members who spoke in America saying we don't have Negro blood, Amhara, we are superior, we have blah blah. That person, by the way, is Ethiopia's ambassador to the AU. So Tafari Mokonnin was brought up in this environment, and he even tried to take it to extra level. Let me tell you this story. The village where Tafari was born is called Ejersa Goro. It's an Oromo name. But later, they changed the name of that place. And guess what they changed the name of that place to? They changed it to Bethlehem. They changed it to Bethlehem. What they're trying to say is, now you can link the dots. If you read the 1955 Constitution of Ethiopia, it tells you that the Orthodox Church is the religion allowed, and I think it's Article 126 or 127, which makes the emperor, which is Haile Selassie, head of the church, and blah blah blah, and that it was from this kind of nonsense people started to worship him. And if you read again even the preamble of the Constitution and the very first part of the Constitution, it addresses the guy, I call him Africa's Hitler, as King of Kings, Lion of Judah. They're trying to elevate him to the level of Jesus Christ. That's why they changed the name from Ejersa Goro to Bethlehem, because Bethlehem was where Jesus was born. So it is not, if you read, I encourage you and your audience to read, it's in public domain, both constitutions. What is even astonishing is the fact that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church was not even mentioned a single time in 1931 Constitution. No, it wasn't mentioned. Even though it was mentioned from the first up to the first 4 articles dedicated to tell us how the royal family came into being, how they linked with Israel, and blah blah blah. Orthodox Christianity was never mentioned. But when they revised it after Haile Selassie, came back from exile, where he took refuge in Britain, they revised that constitution and they put the phrase Orthodox Christianity more than 55 times. So that is the environment, or my assessment of Tafari Mokonnin or Haile Selassie.
Just finally, before we wrap up, and again, it's been 680 days, and we've been tracking this of genocide. Everywhere you look inside of the empire, you're seeing unrest. Some call it internal conflicts. Others would say this is civil war. How does this end, Wario? How does this end?
I have to be brutally honest with you. Ethiopia has now practically been driven out of Tigray. Except for Western Tigray and some parts that have been still occupied. Ethiopia is being wiped out of Oromia. It's the Derg regime, the communist regime, conducted bloody war for 17 years. And how did that war culminate? It did culminate by getting Ethiopia out of Eritrea. The war that Abiy Ahmed is conducting at the moment has already kicked Ethiopia out of Tigray. I mean, it's referendum, this and that. I don't think for 1 second that the Tigray people, when they hold referendum, will vote for Ethiopia to prevail in Tigray. When it comes to Oromia, the Oromo Liberation Army have now controlled the vast territory of Oromia. Probably more than 60% of Oromia's land is being controlled by the Oromo Liberation Army. And the Oromo Liberation Army fighting to ensure the Oromo's right to self-determination. In other words, to restore Oromia's independence. I'm not going to say to ensure Oromia's independence or to make Oromia independent. It is to restore Oromia's independence, because Oromia had been independent sovereign nation before the period of the scramble for Africa. So where would that leave us? Would Ethiopia continue to prevail? It may, in some form, in one form or another, but it will definitely be wiped out of Oromia, as it has been wiped out of Tigray, and definitely it will be wiped out of Ogaden. And Gambela, they never considered themselves as Ethiopian. So I think what I see, to sum it up, is significant geopolitical change in the Horn of Africa. Very significant.
Wow, there's so much more I want to talk to you two about, and others. It's 680 days. Didi Wairo, please, my email is right there. Shoot me an email. I've got some questions, and particularly around what's going on in the South with the Oromo, et cetera. Amir, thank you for constantly keeping us up to date on what's happening in Tigray. And I think that the more we communicate, the more we can connect, you'll start seeing a broader picture and these patterns of superiority, whereas individuals are just not going to submit to someone's notion of superiority and inferiority. That's just not going to happen. And we see that taking place everywhere. There was a time where, just like you saw the young gentleman who was able to travel abroad, he was a part of and attached to the elite family. However, throughout the diaspora, you have learning from every center, every part of what's known as Ethiopia, and they're retracing their history, rebuilding their stories, and reasserting their humanity in the face of oppression. And so I agree, whatever Ethiopia is going to be, it's not what it was. And for those who think that they're going to be able to go back to the time where people were put in their place and they had their own particular ways of serving the king and the crown, I was just amazed that they said that I think his name was, well, I won't get into the name, but it was the tribute they'd had to pay was 300,000 Maria thalers. That, now, for those of you who know the money of that time, that the silver was the thaler, they were extracting from one area inside of the Oromo region 300,000 per year. The wealth is immense and vast, and it has been gone to create wealth for others, while we saw what was known as the Gabar was starving. Stop the genocide in Tigray. Thank you, Didi. Thank you, Amir. And we'll keep our eye on Tigray. Certainly appreciate everybody that was a part of this conversation. Don't forget, it's been 680 days. That is, I don't know. I want to say unacceptable, but that's not the right word. It's shameful. That's not the right word. I don't know what the right word is, but I will tell you, all humanitarians, stand up, know that there's a genocide taking place, and those who say that this is an internal conflict, trust me, your humanity is larger than any arbitrary boundaries that have been drawn on this planet. As a matter of fact, get on a plane and look down on the planet and see if you see any lines that are drawn that demark one place from another. All of that is somebody who is using their power to inflict their wants and desires on you. When you hear someone is being raped, starved in 2022, use your voice, stand up, stomp it out, and know that Tigray Tissa stop the genocide in Tigray. It's been 680 days.
Over 20,000 young girls and women have been raped by Eritrean and Ethiopian military men because of the ongoing genocide. Out of the 6 million population of the Tigray region, 5.2 of them are facing a man-made famine. This is all because the dictator in Ethiopia wants to stay in power illegally and unconstitutionally. We, as a global citizens, have the power to come together and stop the suffering of the innocent people. We're here calling on the U.S. government to impose targeted economic sanctions on Ethiopia and Eritrea, to impose arms embargo so that these genocidal forces do not continue to buy armaments and kill innocent people. You can join our social media movement by using the hashtag Tigray Genocide on Twitter. You can also join our grassroots movement and lobbying efforts by talking to your senators and Congress people and pushing them to impose sanctions on Ethiopia and Eritrea. Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Sanction Ethiopia!
Isaias to the ICC!
Isaias to the ICC!
Isaias to the ICC!
Isaias to the ICC!
Drop food, not bombs!
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 If I can't hear you, they can't hear you. Who are we? Who are we? Who are we? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want it? What do we want it? What do we want it? Who are we? Who are we? Who are we? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want it? 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 Stop the Tigray genocide! 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 This is a peaceful protest against the ongoing state-sponsored genocide in Tigray, Ethiopia. For the past 9 months, the government of Ethiopia colluded with the government of Eritrea to bomb, rape, murder, massacre, and annihilate the Tagaru people. Of the 6 million innocent civilians in Tigray, over 90% of the population is in need of emergency humanitarian aid. There's no food, no water, no gas, no electricity. The people are being annihilated in complete darkness. We've been fighting for 9 months on the street, but we can't do it alone. We need our allies and our outside communities to speak up on our behalf. We united together in the 80s when our people were starving, and we need to do it together again. The people have no food, no water, no aid. They've completely blocked access to the region, and the government of Ethiopia and Eritrea have weaponized hunger and rape as a means to further their own political agenda. We need to unite together and use our voice to bring an end to this. We've done it for the last 9 months, and we can't let up. Who are we? Who are we? Who are we? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want? What do we want it?
I want justice!